Hi everybody, this is Megan Garza with Megan Garza Wellness. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, health coach, and yoga instructor, and you're listening to the Restoring Balance podcast. More women than ever are now dealing with digestive, hormonal, and skin issues and are not finding satisfactory answers or results. On this show, I teach you how to implement holistic lifestyle, dietary, and mindset strategies to help you get smooth digestion and balanced hormones to reclaim your health, feel confident about your decisions, and to finally live life on your terms. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 24, and the title of today's episode is The Connection Between Food Fear and IBS. Before we get into today's episode, if you're a fan of the show, this is just a reminder of how you can support the podcast by giving it a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcast, which helps my show get to other listeners who would benefit from it just like you. Also, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter where you'll receive weekly tips to help you optimize your gut and hormone health, and also receive updates about any upcoming events or announcements. You can sign up for my newsletter by clicking the link in the show notes or heading to my website at Megan Garza Wellness, and you can wait for the pop-up or sign up under the freebies tab. Without further ado, let's dive in. The topics that I'm going to be covering are the definition of food fear and how that shows up, why people with IBS tend to gravitate towards restriction, the link between IBS and food fear, and lastly, how to minimize food fear so that way you can optimize your gut and mental health. So starting off, the definition of food fear in relation to IBS would be that when you feel fear or anxiety about eating a particular food or just food in general because of emotions surrounding it. So this could be because you were previously ill from a food, like maybe you had food poisoning, or maybe you have a food reaction because of a food intolerance. Or maybe you are on the more extreme end of this and you're dealing with orthorexia, which is when you have an obsession with clean eating and food quality. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this because you should not be eating pseudo foods or ultra-processed foods because these things are very harmful to the body. So that is not what I'm talking about. What I'm getting at would be an unhealthy obsession or even just extreme fear around eating in general. So also to clarify, I'm not going to dive into eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, or anything like that. I'm going to briefly touch a little bit on orthorexia because this does have a link between IBS and this is something I've seen many times. But I'm really just focusing on food fear due to digestive disorders. So that's really the main focus of what I'm getting at. So how does restriction start in relation to IBS? So oftentimes when people are diagnosed with IBS, they will gravitate towards restrictive eating patterns to help fix their symptoms. And typically the gold standard for IBS would be like a low FODMAP diet. Some people even do like a low fermentation diet, a high fiber diet, low fiber diet, carnivore. I mean, there's really a lot of different ways and different avenues of approach for this. But initially it will work and it'll help improve the condition. But then you might start restricting more and more depending on if you're not seeing results. And this is going to make your condition much worse because not only is this putting a lot of mental strain on you, but it's also putting a lot of physical strain on your body as well. So why does this happen and how does it show up in the body? I'm just going to lump together food fear from food sensitivities, IBS, and orthorexia just for ease of listening. Some of the ways that this will show up would be simply imagining how you're going to feel after you eat a specific food. So this could trigger anxiety about having stomach cramps or a flare-up, gas, bloating, urgency, or any other gastrointestinal symptoms that are commonly associated with IBS and food sensitivities. Or you might also experience fear of meals being prepared by somebody else, or the fact that you are eating unfamiliar ingredients and that you are not sure how your body is going to react to it. Maybe you're eating foods that are not deemed safe because you've just given into the urge and you want to eat something different. Or maybe you are afraid of eating foods that you have deemed unhealthy or harmful to your body. Or this could look like something more extreme, like cutting out entire food groups with no medical basis or no real reasoning behind this. So maybe you are just kind of taking a shot at the dark and thinking this is going to help if I cut this food out without any kind of knowledge about why you're doing this, but you are just kind of basing it off of maybe it'll help. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but when it continues on and you're not seeing any improvement and you keep doing this and you keep cutting out more foods, this is when it becomes a problem. And then also lastly, how it can show up would be avoiding social events that involve food that does not meet your standards. So all of these things that I have just listed are going to disrupt your normal daily life to a certain extent. So it's not just something that you're going to be experiencing and it's like, okay, well, it's there, it's in my mind. This is something that is going to cause you mental distress. It is something that is going to be always at the forefront of your mind, and you're always going to be thinking about it because you think that you're going to react to a certain foods, or you know you're going to react to a certain food. So it's going to cause mental distress to some extent. And this is where the lines can really start to blur between food fear from IBS and food fear from orthorexia, which I'm going to get into in just a moment, a little bit more. But this is why I do not recommend fad diets or restrictive diets like paleo, vegan, vegetarian, or keto, or anything in between, especially if it's going to be long-term, because it does not fix the problem or help with easing anxiety around certain foods or food groups. And that's truly the issue with elimination diets, and this is where most people unfortunately miss the mark, is that they do not successfully reintroduce foods. So if you are not reintroducing foods and you are staying on these restrictive diets, it can lead to so many physical and mental health problems. So what is the link between food sensitivities, IBS restricting, and orthorexia? Because they all do kind of interlap to an extent. Maybe not orthorexia for everyone, but I've heard of many stories, people who have talked to me saying that they have had IBS and it led to a severe case of orthorexia, or even just severely restricting because of how afraid they were to eat. And unfortunately, fear about food or a reaction to eating this food will ultimately lead to worse IBS symptoms. And IBS is not directly caused by food fear, but food fear can make IBS worse and vice versa. So if you're dealing with one symptom, it can make the other worse. And this is what's known as the gut-brain connection. I talked about this extensively in my last podcast episode on the link between gut health and ADHD. So if that's something that you are dealing with, go check that out. It is episode 24. I will link it in the show notes. The gut-brain connection is the communication between the gut and the brain. Not only does the gut communicate to the brain, but the brain communicates to the gut. So it's a two-way street. And unfortunately, anxiety around food can actually create stomach pain, and it can worsen food reactions. So this really creates a vicious cycle, and it goes both ways, because not only are you mentally afraid to eat now, but now it is physically causing a reaction in your body. This links back to the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve in the body. It is responsible for heart rate, for blood pressure, for digestion, and unfortunately, stress and anxiety can trigger a fight or flight, which is going to impair digestive function. So when sympathetic nervous system activity increases, your digestion is going to suffer. So sympathetic nervous system activity is the fight or flight. Parasympathetic is the rest and digest. This fear that you are feeling around food is going to reside in your nervous system. It is going to remember the fear that you are feeling from remembering these foods and from eating them. So if you have a reaction to a food and now it's a year later and you're thinking, well, maybe I'm okay trying this food, my gut seems a little bit better potentially, and you go and eat that food, if you are not in a state of mind where you are mentally healed from that event, it is going to trigger that same fight or flight reaction in your body. So this is one way that food sensitivities can form when the nervous system is overstimulated, which causes the vagus nerve to be unable to perform optimally, which in turn leads to more food sensitivities. So that's what can potentially cause more and more restriction as time goes on with IBS, is the fact that you are afraid to eat certain foods and you start cutting them out, and then your symptoms aren't getting better. You have a reaction from eating something and you continue to cut out foods, but you're missing a very vital part of why your body is reacting in the first place. And this is why we cannot just blame food, because food is not the sole reason for food sensitivities. A lot of food sensitivities and reactions lie in the nervous system, and this is why nervous system work is critical when you are dealing with IBS. And unfortunately, experiencing these IBS symptoms or just flare-ups or even just digestive distress in general and having food sensitivities is going to potentially lead to more anxiety that is going to cause you to further restrict. With that restriction can sometimes lead to obsessive thoughts and even behaviors. And this can lead to severely limiting food and being afraid to eat certain foods or even just food at all. And it's a very slippery slope that does not lead to anywhere good. So you might remove some foods from your diet, and you're going to keep doing that until it becomes extremely unhealthy. So maybe that is removing multiple food groups, or you have completely cut out all grains, all dairy, all meat, all this, all that, until the point where it's like, okay, now what are you supposed to eat? Because you have a handful of foods that you have deemed safe. And this is going to lead to nutrient deficiencies, and it's going to be mentally strenuous because being able to keep up with something like this is not sustainable by any means. So you can really see how food fear and restricting can start as something very innocent, and then it can spiral into something extremely dangerous. And when restriction gets this bad, it is going to severely impact your life and even potentially lead to something like orthorexia. So this is why it's really important to get this in check and to not be limiting yourself to just a few foods or cutting out entire food groups without actually looking at why is my body reacting. And there are many reasons why food fear and digestive disorders are linked, and this fear is valid. I hear you. I've been there myself. I know how scary it can be and how frustrating it is to be dealing with these things and to feel like you don't have any solutions. So, especially if you don't know if you're going to experience a trigger, it is absolutely going to be a whirlwind of emotions when you are eating, because food is something that's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to bring us joy. And when you don't have these experiences in your life and something that's supposed to be so joyful is not, it's devastating. And I completely understand that, and I hear you. And what you are going through is not easy, but just knowing that the storm will pass. So now on to some tips to minimize food fear. So first and foremost would be to seek professional help. IBS is something that I specialize in with my clients to help them be able to calm their digestive troubles and to do the necessary mindset work to create safety in the body and the mind to truly support your overall health, because the mind and the body are greatly connected, and being able to help calm the anxiety around food is going to help much better than just a fad diet or restriction. Next, you want to really understand that there are no good or bad foods that come from the earth. And I know this might sound kind of frustrating to you, especially if you are dealing with food sensitivities to really seemingly harmless things, but just understanding that it is your body's way of communicating with you when you are dealing with food intolerances. So it's not necessarily that the food is this evil or bad thing that needs to be avoided and you can never eat it ever again, but it's simply your body's way of saying that it needs support and it needs help. So this mindset of fear and hating these foods is going to make your body and mind feel unsafe. And when you feel unsafe, sympathetic nervous system activity increases, and the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight or flight. And with that is going to come worse digestion. So as hard as it might be to view food intolerances as your body's way of communicating with you, it creates a much more soft and loving environment to view these things instead of just, these foods are evil, my body is terrible, nothing is working, and shifts it to more of a mindset of, okay, I get it. My body's trying to tell me something, that there's something not going right, and I need to lean into that and to see what is going on. So more of a perspective of curiosity and loving kindness to yourself. So kind of piggybacking off of that, you're really going to want to focus on digestive function and nervous system work. I have an entire episode on digestive health and function. It is episode 16. I will link it in the show notes. I highly recommend that you listen to that episode if you are dealing with IBS and food sensitivities and food fear or any kind of digestive dysfunction, because learning how the digestive system works is imperative for you to be able to support it properly. The next tip for minimizing food fear would be acknowledging that just because you used to react to a certain food, that doesn't mean that you always will, or it'll be something that you react to forever. This is a really huge pitfall and a trap that a lot of people fall into. The fact that I see this with like dairy and gluten and people thinking their bodies are so broken and they're never going to be able to eat any kind of gluten or dairy or soy, wheat, fish, like whatever it might be. Just acknowledging that your body is in a state of needing a lot of help right now when you are reacting to these things. But that does not mean that it's going to continue to react to these foods forever. So this is kind of a way to allow yourself to feel that hope that you need, rather than live in a feared mindset and scarcity mindset. The next tip I would have would be to plan ahead. So if you know that you're going to a social event, or you are traveling, or even if you are grocery shopping, make sure that you have a plan. So that could either be writing a comprehensive grocery shopping list, bringing snacks with you, bringing your digestive supplements to help you minimize the stress of potentially eating a trigger food and to minimize that reaction. And this is going to lead to a lot of opportunities for you to be able to be with your friends at a social event, or being able to travel without the fear of, are we going to have to pull over and I'm going to have a bowel movement urgently. So if you take the time to just plan ahead a little bit, this can really minimize the amount of stress and anxiety that you're going to potentially feel around eating and food in general, which in turn is going to lead to better digestion. And lastly, this is something that I cannot stress enough. This is so important to work on, is mindset work and mindfulness. So studies have shown that mindset work and mindfulness can actually improve digestive disorders because of the gut-brain connection. So if you are allowing yourself to really get into that rest and digest state, and this is something that you are doing regularly, you are going to notice that your IBS symptoms are beginning to calm down. So allowing your mind to calm down and settle into a relaxed state is going to ease your body. And this is ultimately going to lead to much better digestion and also just less anxiety in general. So those are the main tips that I have for you on how to minimize food fear so that way your IBS can begin to calm down. And that's pretty much it for this episode. I know it was a rather short one, but it was short, sweet, and to the point. So to wrap everything up, the biggest takeaways for this episode are being aware of food fears and psychological triggers, how restriction for IBS can be a slippery slope that leads to worse health outcomes, and then lastly, the tips for minimizing food fear that we just went over. So just remember to take it step by step and to keep learning on your wonderful journey of wellness. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Today we talked about signs of food fear in relation to IBS, the link between IBS, the nervous system, and food fear, and tips to minimize it. You can expect new episodes every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just a quick reminder again of how you can support the podcast and stay in the loop. You can sign up for my newsletter so that way you can be notified every time I post a new podcast episode, make any new announcements about my services and how you can work with me, and also receive any weekly relevant tips for digestion and hormones so you can optimize your health. You can find the link to sign up for my newsletter in the show notes or head to my website at megangarzawellness.com and you can wait for the pop-up or sign up under the freebies tab. Again, I just want to thank you so much for listening to this week's topic. Your support means so much to me. Take care, everyone, and until next time.